Hi. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to D&D Optimized, part of the D4 network, the show where each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and we theorycraft about them, we crunch some numbers, and basically we try to create a character that is both really fun and really powerful to play in-game. So if you enjoy creating characters for D&D almost as much as you enjoy actually playing the game, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm super happy to have you. So thanks for being here. My name's Colby, and I'll be your host. So before we jump into the episode today, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy what you're seeing or think you might continue wanting to watch it, please go ahead and click on the little thumbs up down there, the little like. It actually really helps the algorithms and all of the things to help this video be successful. So anyway, thank you. All right, let's jump in. I get a lot of requests to create support characters with these weekly episodes. Not too surprising, since I think a lot of people enjoy focusing on more of a support role in their role-playing games. These people are all generally much nicer than I am, much less selfish. My response is usually something like this. Well, I have done a lot of support characters, but most of them, like the Moon Druid or the Death Knight or the Undead Support Warlock or the Mercy Monk or the Spore Beast, they all tend to provide support and do other things, typically damage. So if you're looking for a true, like 100% all I do is support my teammates type build, I've really only done two. One was the battery portion of the battery in the blender, the cleric and the rogue team up build that I did. There's a little link for you right there. And then the other was the support lore bard, right here. In that episode in particular, the thing that I spent most of the preamble talking about, this is the preamble, by the way, was how inefficient it was to try to be a pure healer in D&D and just do nothing but heal, right? And how difficult and maybe not very useful it was to try and quantify how much healing a character could do if they just wanted to focus exclusively on that in D&D. And then I proceeded to build a character that focused mostly on healing and tried to quantify it. Admittedly, I think the character was really quite good at a lot of different support type things. But the healing is what ended up getting quantified, mostly because it was the easiest thing to try and quantify in a support character. Now, obviously, if we're going to build a character who is focused exclusively on supporting their allies, we need to figure out what we mean when we say support, right? I mean, controlling the enemy is one form of support, is it not? Buffing our allies, another. Debuffing our enemies, a third. And then, of course, there is healing. Without rehashing the argument that I already made in that episode, like I mentioned, the general consensus is it's just not super efficient in D&D to try and heal all the time and just keep your allies at full health constantly, right? It's not like we can just drink a mana potion to replenish our spellcasting resource in this game, and usually the amount of damage that an enemy can do to us or our allies will just greatly outpace any healing that we could potentially provide to try and counter. That said, there have been some additional subclasses added to D&D in recent months, as well as some other changes that Tasha's Cauldron of Everything introduced that have given me pause on that assumption, right? That you can't just build a character for healing and that you can't just sort of focus on healing your allies all the time and keep them at full health or close to full health. I've had this thought in the back of my brain for a while now that wonders if we couldn't disprove that notion that you can't really effectively and efficiently just focus on healing your allies in D&D, trying to keep everyone at full health all the time, etc. To be honest, as I was writing the preamble for this show before actually trying to dive in and create the character and crunch the numbers, I was like, I kind of don't want to know the answer to this question because I'm worried that I might discover that we could, in fact, build a character that was so good at healing that they very possibly could do what a healer does in, say, an online role-playing game like World of Warcraft, etc. And frankly, I don't want D&D to turn into that kind of game, right? Where you have to have a tank that absorbs all of the enemy damage, and you have to have a healer that can keep them alive, and then you have to have damage, DPR, DPS characters, damage characters. I don't want D&D to turn into that, right? I think it's very different, and I think that's good. But on the other hand, not knowing whether it's possible is an itch in the back of my brain that I just have to scratch. And besides, the great thing about D&D is that, we can make it into whatever we want, whatever kind of game we want, right? There's no official Wizards content that's created out there that sort of dictates that, look, the only way you're going to get through this content is if you have a tank and a healer and then damage. So what's the harm in discovery? What's the harm in asking that question and trying to find out? So that's what we're going to attempt to do today. Create a character who just might actually be capable of keeping their party essentially healed up and topped off at full health or close to throughout an entire adventuring day. Now, obviously, there are a lot of classes with some really nice healing options. Like I said, I did a Mercy Monk recently. Maybe I'll link it there. That was sort of half support healer, half burst damage character. It could be fun, on the other hand, to combine a Celestial Warlock with a Divine Soul Sorcerer, I think. For a healer Sorlock, that could be cool. Maybe even with some Spirit Bard thrown in, I think. Might be fun. But when it comes to pure, raw, unadulterated healing, it's hard, I think, in D&D to beat the Druid and the Cleric. I think those two classes in particular were designed by Wizards of the Coast to be the strongest healers in the game, based on their spell list, based on their class features, and then especially, of course, for certain subclasses. So in our attempt to create a character that can heal as much as possible, I think we've got to go with one of those two classes or both. Now, what about when we try and quantify the data? What I did for the support bard, and what I'm going to do here as well, is definitely an imperfect system of quantification. But in the end, frankly, I care a little bit less about having something that perfectly imitates D&D combat, which in my opinion is essentially impossible due to all the varying factors that we can't account for. And I care more about having something that makes some sense and is a standard by which I can compare other builds to one another, as evidenced, for example, by my tank builds, right? And the way that I try and quantify their efficacy, right? Or crunch those numbers, or even frankly the way we use DPR as a measuring stick, which is also an imperfect, if still useful, tool. So what I'm going to measure here is how much total healing this character could do if they spent each of their spells on the most efficient heal possible that was available to them. We will call that total combat healing, or TCH. And then I'm going to add actually a little component where we divide that total number by the number of rounds they would actually be able to cast spells every single turn. In other words, until they run out of resources. We will call that HPR, or healing per round, with the understanding that it's an average. It's not truly sustainable because it's using up finite resources, right? That said, at most tables, we should be able to get through at least 2 or 3 combat encounters per day at sort of these levels of healing. And so, I'm proud to present episode 49, the Starry Twilight Healer. Bring, bring. With some lovely artwork, courtesy of my friend Randall Hampton, which I really loved the piece that he put together for this. I think it's awesome. Totally nails it. And just a reminder, by the way, Randall and I are going to do our collaboration video together coming up next week at the time of this recording. So July 21st, 2021. What we're going to do on his Twitch stream, I'm going to present my weekly build live on his Twitch stream on the evening of the 21st. He's, without any prior knowledge of the character that I'm creating, he's going to draw his concept of the character while I'm sort of talking about it and presenting it, which I think will be really cool and really fun. I will, of course, post the video then the following day on the YouTube channel here. So if you want to watch it live, you can. I'll post a link in the video description. But if you're okay to wait until the next morning, I will post it here. That will be a Thursday morning, which means that I'm not going to have a D&D optimized episode next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, which is usually when I post these. So you're gonna have to wait a couple of extra days. I apologize. I think it will be worth the wait. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to that. I hope you are too. And let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1. For our class, we are going to start Cleric. And as for our race, we're going to go custom lineage. There's a feat that I really want. To be honest, I really, really wanted to go with the Mark of Healing Halfling here because it's so on point and fun and different. And I never use halflings and I love hobbits. But for the sake of numbers, I didn't do it. If you already get a free feat at your table and or you really just want to go with a halfling because it would be more fun or something else for that matter, then you totally should. We're doing custom lineage. As for the free feat that we pick up, I'm going to recommend Chef because it's a half feat and also because it's just the cutest and sweetest feat in all of D&D. With Chef, we get a +1 to either our Constitution or our Wisdom. We'll take Wisdom. And then on a short rest, you can prepare food for up to 4 plus your proficiency bonus. So 6 for us right now, right? At the end of the rest, anyone who eats your food and spends hit dice can add a 1d8 to the recovered hit points. So it's kind of like a bard's song of rest, really, which is great. Also, with an hour's work, or after a long rest, you can make treats. You create a number of treats equal to your proficiency bonus. Again, just 2 for now. They last 8 hours. Man, that stuff is fresh, right? No preservatives in this food. Must be all organic. And then as a bonus action, your friend that you give the treat to can eat one and gain temporary hit points equal to your proficiency bonus. So it's just a couple. It's not amazing. I really wish, frankly, that it healed instead. But this feat is just so flavorful, pun intended, that I just couldn't pass it up, especially because it lets us start with an 18 wisdom. If you don't love the Chef features or you find them redundant later, I would probably just go telekinetic here instead. As for our ability scores, I'm assuming, as always, point by. We want to take a 15 wisdom, +2 from our custom lineage, +1 from our Chef feat, so we get to start with an 18 wisdom, like I said, which is great. I would go 15 constitution and probably 14 dexterity, mostly for the better initiative and saving throw. Feel free to distribute your points there from dex a little more evenly if you'd like, because dexterity does not actually benefit our armor class, because for equipment, we are taking a shield and chainmail. Just sort of standard equipment. Make sure you at least get those 2 things though. And yes, as a cleric, we do get chainmail because for our divine domain, our subclass that clerics get at level 1, and we are choosing the Twilight Cleric. What? No! Last week, I got that reaction from a few of you because I took a subclass that's known to be underpowered and weak. This week, I'm sure I will get that reaction from quite a few more of you for taking a class that is known to be overpowered and way too strong. So let's discuss the oft-maligned Twilight Cleric. I've been getting actually a lot of specific requests to do a Twilight Cleric build since Tasha's came out. I've been avoiding it for a number of reasons, but at the top of that reason list is because, yes, it's very, very strong. Arguably too strong. And I know it's going to make some people freak out. Here are my thoughts. Yes, it is very strong. Yes, it has the potential to throw off game balance. Also, it's official Wizards of the Coast content that a lot of people want to play, that a lot of people have gotten great enjoyment from playing. And also, I feel a lot less bad about putting a Twilight Cleric into a character concept like this one, right? If your greatest desire is to play a character who focuses exclusively on doing something that most would argue is a very unoptimized way to play in D&D, healing all the time, then taking a subclass that is arguably too good at healing all the time, right? Now, we're making temporary hit points and healing synonymous here for the sake of argument. More on that in a minute. But anyway, if we're doing that, taking this subclass just might help you find sort of viability and a balance to an otherwise suboptimal playstyle. Part of me wants to say, look, a lot of people really enjoy, being a healer in a role-playing game and just like healing full-time. And who am I to tell them that that's not a viable way to play in D&D, that the way that you want to have fun doesn't work here, right? And so if the Twilight Cleric allows what was previously thought of as a non-tenable way to play the game that a lot of people have wanted to do, I think I'm okay with it, right? Let people play in a way that is fun to them. And if being a full-time healer is fun for you and you previously weren't really able to do it, but maybe now you can, I don't see that as a bad thing. What's more, there are plenty of subclasses and feats and spells that are arguably overpowered in D&D, right? This, of course, the Twilight Cleric is the latest target for power creep complaints. But let's not forget that things like the Hexblade Warlock, Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master feats, the Animate Object spell all exist in-game, and people generally seem to have a little bit less of a problem with those, though they too tend to dwarf comparable options in power level. Now, you might argue that the difference between a Hexblade Warlock and other Warlock subclasses is less egregious than the difference between a Twilight Cleric and other Cleric subclasses. I'm not going to debate you on that. I don't feel personally that something deemed to be too strong is necessarily in and of itself a reason to ban it from your table. So let's just explore this subclass and we will continue analyzing it as we go. This is what we read about the Twilight Cleric. The twilight transition from light into darkness often brings calm and even joy as the day's labors end and the hours of rest begin. The darkness can also bring terrors, but the gods of twilight guard against the horrors of the night. Clerics who serve these deities bring comfort to those who seek rest and protect them by venturing into the encroaching darkness to ensure that the dark is a comfort, not a terror. I love this description, and I'm totally going to use this concept and maybe even quote from it at some point with my character, Saradon, that we're playing in our live play games, Tales of Veneria, that we've been posting on the channel, right? In case you haven't seen them. As she sort of learns to come to grips with sort of the darkness within her. I love this concept that, like, the darkness doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be bad, it doesn't have to be evil, it can be comforting, right? Speaking of Saradon and Tales of Veneria, I wanted to also just very quickly give a huge shout out and nod to Matt Hilker. he created this fantastic fan art. It's Ceradon, and a bounder. For those who don't know, bounders are these like large rabbits that people in the world that Corey, our DM, has created. They basically ride them like horses, for example, and race them. We got into a bounder race at one point that Ceradon actually crashed horribly in and caused a big pile up. But anyway, I loved this artwork. I thought it was so great, and it was so cool to see like fan art. So anyway, thanks, Matt. And I'm going to post links in the video description here to his Instagram and Twitter account, so you can follow him if you'd like, or at the very least, give him a shout out for his fantastic Starry artwork. What do we get as a Twilight cleric at level 1? We get, well, first up, proficiency with heavy armor and martial weapons, because the subclass wasn't good enough already. We actually have no plans to make weapon attacks ever, but I'll take heavy armor proficiency, sure, and that's why we got to start with chainmail, right? We also get a feature called Eyes of Night. Okay, so we get dark vision out to 300 feet, which feels a little nuts, but there you go. And also, as an action, once per day, unless you spend a spell slot, you can give this dark vision up to wisdom modifier number of allies. That's 4 for us right now, so you can probably give this dark vision to your whole party if you need to for an hour. Okay, that's really good. But admittedly, the vast majority of races in D&D these days have dark vision, right? So while, yes, it totally makes not having dark vision beyond trivial for your entire party, the reality is you probably only had like one character in your party at most who didn't already have dark vision anyway, right? Unless you're playing some sort of like human-only campaign or something like that. So I don't personally feel like this feature here is worth a lot of the table flipping that some are doing over it personally. Yes, it's very strong. Yes, it trivializes, the dark vision spell, which in my opinion was a little bit not a super great spell anyway. But anyway, what else? Okay, we also get Vigilant Blessing. So as an action, you give yourself or someone else advantage on their next initiative roll. No time limit, no limit how often you can cast it, other than it can only affect one creature at a time. Again, a very strong ability, especially when combined with everything else that the subclass already gets. Of course, we haven't even gotten to the best ability that Twilight clerics get yet, so hang on for that until next level. As for spells, we get some cantrips, we get some first level spells, of course. There are a lot of great options for a support and healing focused character who is a cleric at level 1. For cantrips, you're definitely going to want guidance, right? Which requires concentration, but lets any target add a d4 to any ability check. So it's especially useful, out of combat for pretty much any party member, and in combat occasionally, including yourself. I really like Spare the Dying here. It lets you stabilize an unconscious party member so that they don't have to make death saving throws in case you're out of heals and you can't bring them back up, right? Hold the Dead will typically be our go-to damage cantrip that forces an enemy to make a wisdom saving throw or take d12 in necrotic damage, assuming they're not at full health. It's a d8 otherwise. For first level spells, of course, you've got to get Bless. I think one of the best buffs in the game, and our go-to concentration spell for now, giving up to 3 allies a d4 on their attack rolls and saving throws. Cure Wounds, of course, which heals for 1d8 per spell level plus your wisdom modifier. It requires an action. It only has the range of touch, which is why I think most people consider Healing Word to be a stronger healing spell, even though it's only a d4 plus your wisdom modifier. It can be cast as a bonus action from 30 feet. So I would take both if you can get to your ally and make a touch on them. You're going to get a little more mileage out of Cure Wounds, especially later on. Actually, we'll get to that in a few minutes. As for a damage option, if you want a damage option as a level 1 spell, I'd probably go with Guiding Bolt. Inflict Wounds famously does more damage to a single target than any other first level spell at 3d10. It scales great as well, but it requires touch. It requires a melee attack, right? And Guiding Bolt does only slightly less, at least at this level, 46 damage. And it can be cast from range, but then also it gives the next attack advantage against the target if your Guiding Bolt hits. So Definitely scales worse. At higher spell slots, it might be a tougher decision. You might want to go with inflict wounds. But anyway, we're not planning on doing a lot of damage anyway, but you ought to have something in your quiver just in case. At level 2, so we get Channel Divinity. All clerics get Channel Divinity at level 2. You can use it once per short rest for now. And by default, all clerics can use it to turn undead, which tells us that as an action, we can cause undead that can see or hear you within 30 feet to make a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail it, they have to spend their turn basically running away from you. Very powerful in certain situations. But then we have Twilight Sanctuary. So all clerics get a second option for their Channel Divinity based on their subclass, and ours is the thing that causes the most complaints of, being overpowered for the Twilight Cleric. And for good reason. It's incredibly strong. As an action, you can cause a sphere of twilight to emanate from you in a 30-foot radius. That's a big sphere. It's filled with dim light. It lasts for 1 minute. When someone ends their turn in that sphere, including you, you can either give them temporary hit points equal to a d6 plus your cleric level. So very strong scaling, right? The more levels you gain. Or you can end a charmed or frightened effect on that character. So, right, this is amazing. The fact that the sphere is large enough for you to fairly easily get all of your party members inside it. It doesn't require any sort of concentration, though it ends if you're incapacitated or dead. It scales really well, and the temporary hit points are given without requiring you to spend like an action, a bonus action, or the party member to spend an action or a bonus action either, for that matter. All those things together just make this incredibly powerful, right? The question is it going to create a problem in your campaign? It might. It almost assuredly will if you have another party member who also wants to provide support and healing, especially if they have a way to give temporary hit points to allies, because temporary hit points don't stack, as we know, and this, Twilight Sanctuary is really like a stronger source of temporary hit points than any other spell or feature or ability in the game. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, as always, of course, is discuss your plan for your character with your fellow players and with your DM, and make sure that the other characters in your campaign are not going to feel overshadowed, pun intended, by you. If someone else really wants to focus on support, or even like hybrid support, you might want to bench this character until your next campaign. But if no one else is all that interested in playing a support character, I have a really hard time imagining that a lot of your fellow players are going to be complaining that you're ruining their fun by healing them all the time, right? If you're doing way more damage than everybody else and getting all the kills and kind of stealing the spotlight that way, I can see more people being like, oh, my character's lame. But if you're letting everybody else do all of the damage and blow stuff up and all of that kind of stuff, and you're just like healing them and enabling them and keeping them alive, I just don't think that most people are going to have a big problem with that. Unless, I guess, maybe it's like you're making the game too easy. And so, if there's never any risk of me dying, then it's not as fun. But you know what? The DM can always make adjustments there and make the enemies hit harder or take longer to kill to increase the risk. So, yes, I suppose, if anything, you could definitely make your DM's life a little more difficult by playing a Twilight Cleric and potentially create a problem in that way. But I think a good DM should be able to adjust. Now, all of that said, for now, at least, we can only use this once per short rest. So if we're getting more combat encounters than that, it's not going to be available every single fight. So your mileage on this ability will vary greatly depending on the frequency of your encounters versus your rests, how hard your enemies hit, whether they tend to spread out damage evenly amongst all party members or really kind of focus their fire on one specific target at a time, trying to take them out. Again, largely dependent on your DM, on your table, how they play it. Regardless, the ability is very, very strong, and let's move on. At level 3, we get second level spells. So there are a lot of great second level spells, but if we're trying to focus on being a great healer, I think we need to get just a couple of them here. Aid, which lasts 8 hours, doesn't require concentration. It raises the maximum hit point total of up to 3 allies. It scales nicely, five more hit points per spell level that you cast it. And again, as a reminder, this is not temporary hit points, so it can stack with your Twilight Sanctuary, for example. I would also make sure that we pick up Lesser Restoration, which can cure blind, deaf, paralyze, poison, so that's a great one to have. And Prayer of Healing actually is a good one as well. It lets you, after a 10-minute cast, so again, not really usable in combat, heals up to 2d8 plus your wisdom modifier for up to 6 creatures. So very efficient, really, again, only useful outside of combat. Here's a question. Do you take Spiritual Weapon? Obviously, if you want to, yes. But, it's a nice way to get sort of a weaponized bonus action for clerics that doesn't require concentration, and so most clerics wouldn't leave home without it. We will have a fairly reliable use for our bonus action, at least for the next several levels. And we're focused on healing, so I'm not going to worry about taking Spiritual Weapon. If you want to do more than just heal, it's obviously worth considering. At level 4, we get our first ability score increase, or feat, and I'm going to recommend just bumping our wisdom. So we've gone from an 18 to a 20, and at level 4, we are capped on our most important ability score, which feels... At level 5, we get third level spells, and there are too many good ones to discuss all of them. We can't take all of them, but let me highlight the ones that I think we should consider. Mass Healing Word is a good way to give your entire party a little shot of healing. If you have multiple party members that could really use a bump, and you only want to spend a bonus action to do so. Remove Curse feels pretty important to me. It's one of those, when you really need it, but otherwise you never use it kind of things. Revivify is actually sort of the same, but if no one else has Revivify, you're gonna get some raised eyebrows when someone in your party dies and the dedicated healer doesn't have a way to bring them back. So I definitely get this unless you're just so confident in your healing abilities that you don't think anyone will ever die on your watch. I don't know, maybe you want to live that way. Maybe you want that high risk playstyle. But regardless, if you have it, make sure you keep 300 gold worth of diamonds on you at all times so that when you need it, you can cast that spell, because it's that's the component that gets consumed, right? And then there are 2 concentration spells that I think we need to consider here. The first one is one of, if not my favorite, healing spells in D&D. And Twilight Clerics get it for free. So it's Aura of Vitality. It costs an action to cast, it requires concentration, and thereafter, as a bonus action, you can heal any ally within a 30-foot radius for 2d6 hit points. Without, you don't have to spend any more spell slots to do that. Just bonus action, 2d6 hit points of healing. It's not a ton of healing. I mean, you don't even get to add your wisdom modifier, which is a bummer, but the fact that you can do it every single turn without spending any more spell slots as a bonus action makes it super, super efficient, especially the longer the fight continues, right? The more mileage you're going to get out of this spell. It is unquestionably, in my mind, the way to go if you are a life cleric, because the little bonus to healing they get should apply to every single, 2d6 use, right? Based on the way that the life cleric healing bonus is worded. Since we're not a life cleric, however, I think there is another concentration spell that warrants our attention. And it is one that I don't think I've ever even talked about in any of my previous builds before, Beacon of Hope. So it also requires an action to cast, it requires your concentration, and then when you cast it, as many targets as you want within 30 feet of you when you cast it have advantage on wisdom saves, and that's potentially huge. Advantage on death saves, which seems nice, but the reality is if somebody's making a death saving throw, it means you're probably dead or unconscious, or I guess at the very least out of spell slots. And most importantly, it allows them to regain the maximum number of hit points possible from any healing that they receive. Depending on the situation, depending on how many resources you have, how long combat is lasting, etc., you might want to use this instead of Aura of Vitality. And I think we almost for sure will later. Assuming you cast Aura of Vitality and then spend every single other spell slot you have on Cure Wounds, which is our most efficient heal right now, Aura of Vitality heals for slightly more over the same number of rounds. And then, of course, the longer combat goes, the better it gets. That will change for us eventually, like I say, as we get higher spell slots and other things. But for now, I think I probably go with Aura of Vitality and maybe later, depending on the situation. Level 6. We can now use our Channel Divinity twice per short rest. This is the main reason why I wanted to get to level 6 in Cleric as soon as possible. Now that we can do Channel Divinity twice per short rest, I think it's safe to say that most of us will have that overpowered Twilight Sanctuary for pretty much every fight, or almost every fight. Now, maybe if you bring a Twilight Cleric to the party, your DM will change their usual rest cadence. I don't know. But keep that in mind and watch out for it. Talk about it, right? We also, as a Twilight Cleric, get the Steps of Night feature. So now we can fly for 1 minute as a bonus action because we were a little underpowered before. So you have to be in dim light or darkness, of course, but for us that's easy, right? And you can use this proficiency bonus times per day, so 3 times per day now. That's really good. It's really strong. It will definitely make getting around the battlefield to heal our allies a lot easier, among other things. Okay, let's do our first damage report. So for our damage report here at level 6, the question we need to address is, if we're going to try to figure out how much healing a character is capable of doing over an entire combat or even over an entire day and average that per turn, etc., how do we account for the Twilight Sanctuary ability? Do we call that healing, right? While it's true that you can give a bunch of temporary hit points to everyone in your party every turn, it's not necessarily technically healing, right? They might be missing some hit points, but still have temporary hit points because they haven't taken damage since the previous turn where they got some temporary hit points from you, right? Or they might have lost some of the temporary hit points that you gave them, and now you're just sort of replenishing those, topping them off so they're not getting the full 1d6 plus 6 temporary hit points, which is our cleric level, so that's what they'd be getting now from Twilight Sanctuary. But instead, they might be getting some number less than that, right? Regardless of all of those things, in the interest of exploring what's possible and not making my brain hurt too much, I'm simply going to assume that we have a party of 4 who are all taking at least the temporary hit points you're giving them in damage every single round. It's absolutely imperfect, as are all the ways we try to predict how the numbers are going to work in this game. And in all likelihood, the numbers that I'm going to share with you here are going to be a little inflated as a result. But again, this is the total healing that you could potentially do if you absolutely needed to, assuming you spent 1 third level spell slot on Aura of Vitality and every other spell slot on Cure Wounds, which again, you almost surely wouldn't and shouldn't do. But we're just exploring what's possible. We will add the heals from the Aura of Vitality and the Twilight Sanctuary sort of temporary hit points that I'm calling heals, right? For as many rounds as you have spell slots, which is 9 right now if you subtract 1 for the Aura of Vitality. Because that's what we did for the support bard, and I want to be consistent in order to have some semblance of useful numbers here. So that was the longest preamble I've ever done for a damage report. Total combat healing at this level, 535 hit points if you calculate it as I just described above. And the average healing per round that you would do over those 9 rounds, right, is 59. So, okay, that's a ton. Here's a question. Could this much healing actually sustain a typical party of adventurers at a typical D&D table for, say, 3 combat encounters? We'll call that an adventuring day. Assuming a party of 4 D8 characters with a 14 constitution each, and sure, you might have a fighter or a barbarian that would actually have more than that, but you were probably also going to have a wizard or a sorcerer that would have less, so we'll just call that sort of your average party member. At level 6, each party member would have 45 hit points on average for a total of 180 hit points total in your party. So yeah, if we can heal 535 hit points using counting the temporary hit points that we're giving, counting all of your spell slots for cure wounds, except for one that you're using over 9 rounds to grant 2d6 once per turn, then yes, you absolutely could. If your entire party took 100% of their hit points in damage over 3 combat encounters, you could just about out-heal all of it. But again, not all of your party members are going to be taking enough damage per round to cause them to need your free temporary hit points. And of course, we'll probably want some of our spell slots to do other things, right? Regardless, this is what's possible. And while it may be an imperfect system, I think it at least tells us one thing. You're probably capable of doing a great job of keeping your allies in tip-top shape most of the time. At level 7, our cleric's love of the dim and the dark has deepened and evolved even. They're becoming more and more enchanted by the stars that appear to them when they enshroud themselves in twilight. They sense an additional power in those stars, perhaps, and they seek to better understand that power that they may draw upon it more effectively so as to better heal and aid their allies. Whatever your reason, we're taking some druid levels here to enhance our healing and protecting capabilities. So we're at druid level 1, and at this level we get a couple of things. We get druidic, which is the secret language of the druids and can be really useful for some nice utility and story moments. And then we get spells, of course. So there are some really nice druid spells, but we do already have access to the best healing spells, I think, outside maybe of Goodberry, which creates 10 berries that heal for 1 hit point each, and they provide enough sustenance for a day. We don't have a way to benefit these good berries like if we had taken Life Cleric, so it really is just 1 hit point, which isn't amazing, but it's 10 hit points for a level 1 spell, okay, and it provides sustenance for a day. That's potentially very useful, right? And I think it goes nicely with our chef feat. Perhaps you could create some delicious good berry bread pudding. Entangle also is a nice control spell for level 1, causing targets in a 20-foot cube to be restrained, barring a strength saving throw. Beyond that, I'd just take whatever spells look the most fun or useful or powerful to you. At level 8, we are a druid 2, and we get Wild Shape. So this is great for mostly utility for us, allowing us to twice per short rest change into a beast of 1/4 challenge rating or lower that doesn't have a flying or swimming speed, and that will scale and change as we take levels in Druid. But I am not planning on using our Wild Shape for transforming into beasts very much, because at level 2 we also get our subclass, our Druidic Circle, and we are going, in case you hadn't guessed yet, with the Circle of Stars. The Circle of Stars allows druids to draw on the power of starlight. These druids have tracked heavenly patterns since time immemorial, discovering secrets hidden amid the constellations. By revealing and understanding these secrets, the Circle of Stars seeks to harness the powers of the cosmos. Thematically, this is just a match made in heaven, I think. It's natural, isn't it? That someone who is drawn to the twilight would find themselves fascinated, inspired, and even empowered by the stars. So we get a couple of really great features from Star Druid here. First up, we get our star map. It serves as a spellcasting focus for our druid spells, and while holding it, we know the guidance cantrip. So feel free to learn something else if and when you can, if you get that opportunity. And we have the Guiding Bolt spell prepared, and it doesn't count against the number of spells we have prepared. So again, if you took that as a cleric, feel free to take something else if and when you can, which we may or may not be able to. But anyway, proficiency bonus times per day, we can even cast Guiding Bolt without expending a spell slot, which is great. And at the first level, I presume, it's a first level spell, though it doesn't specify. That's really nice indeed for a little damage that doesn't take away from our ability to heal if we've got no wounded allies to patch up and we're looking to add a little extra damage on our turn. And then we also get our Starry form. So that's the real reason that we're here. As a bonus action, which, by the way, is really nice because using our Twilight Sanctuary is an action, so now we can do both of these things in the same turn, right? Twilight Sanctuary as an action, and then as a bonus action, we can expend a use of our Wild Shape, again, 2 per short rest, so we should be able to do this for most, if not all, combat encounters, to take on a Starry form. While in your Starry form, this is what we read. While in your Starry form, you retain your game statistics, but your body becomes luminous. Your joints glimmer like stars, and glowing lines connect them as on a star chart. This form sheds bright light in a 10-foot radius and dim light for an additional 10 feet. The form lasts for 10 minutes. It ends early if you dismiss it, are incapacitated to die, or use this feature again. Now, when we transform into our Starry form, we choose a constellation that glimmers on our body, and depending on the constellation that we choose, we get certain benefits. There's the Archer constellation, which lets us deal ranged radiant damage as a bonus action. Very nice. Or the Dragon, which lets us treat a 9 or lower rolled on a Wisdom, Intelligence, or Concentration check to be treated as a 10, which is really cool. Or the one that we're planning on using, the Chalice constellation, which tells us that whenever we cast a spell using a spell slot that restores hit points, you or another creature within 30 feet can regain 1d8 plus your Wisdom modifier in additional hit points. That's essentially a free level 1 cure wounds every single time you cast a healing spell. And frankly, it's amazing. That said, it's important to note some wording here. Life clerics, if you'll recall, are told that they get to add healing whenever they use a spell to restore hit points. And that is why most people agree that the life cleric bonus would apply to every berry in the good berry spell, for example, or every time you used Aura of Vitality, making those already nice spells incredibly efficient for life clerics. The Chalice Starry form, on the other hand, says we get to add the extra healing when we cast a spell that restores hit points, which is definitely not the same thing. Still very, very nice, but just don't get those things confused. So at this point in our career, we've hit a bit of a fork in the road, I think. We've got a solid foundation of incredibly powerful Twilight Cleric abilities, and we've got a fantastic way to make our healing spells even stronger from the Star Druid. There are a lot of different routes we could take for our character from here, of course, but I think if we really want to maximize our healing and our protecting abilities, we ought to stick with Cleric or Druid. On the one hand, if we were to continue down the Cleric path, we would get a lot of valuable things. Quicker access to higher level spells, for one. So if that's your priority, I would say go back to Cleric. There are some good ones waiting, and not just for healing, of course, but in particular, Mass Cure Wounds, Heal, Greater Restoration, and even Mass Heal eventually at 9th level, which at the 9th level spell slot, which lets you heal 700 hit points distributed however you want, as well as curing blind, deaf, and disease. That's, I think, the pinnacle of healing spells in the game. You would also, if you went back to Cleric, of course, get an even more powerful Twilight Sanctuary, right? As the temporary hit points that it provides go up with your Cleric level. But here's the thing. For me, I really like the Star Druid features a lot more that you get at later levels. I think they're super useful. I think that they will keep the game a little more interesting and fun. The truth is, we've already got the most powerful Twilight Cleric abilities in our pocket, and even though getting more free and easy party-wide temporary hit points is really strong, the reality is that party-wide temporary hit points isn't always going to get the job of keeping your allies alive done just all by itself, right? More Star Druid levels will eventually make our actual healing even stronger in a way that I think Twilight Cleric can't match. Aside, of course, from higher level spells like we've mentioned, which most of which we'll get to eventually regardless. So you do what you want from here. Whatever path you end up taking, I'm sure you will be an amazing full-time healer for your party. But as for us, we're sticking with Druid. So at level 9, we are a Druid 3. And we get second level Druid spells. Again, a lot of great spells here, like Spike Growth, Pass Without a Trace, etc., that you should consider, but none that we really need for like healing purposes. So pick your favorites. Let's do a level 9 damage report. So for our damage report here, keep in mind that we have these spell slots of a full like 9th level caster, despite our multi-classing, right? So that means 1 5th level spell slot, 3 4th level, 3 3rd level, 3 2nd level spell slots, and 4 1st level spell slots, for a total of 14 spell slots, one of which we will assume that we're going to be spending on our concentration spell, which at this point, I think, ought to change to Beacon of Hope. Actually, it probably should have changed last level when we got our Chalice Starry form. Here's why. Each target that you choose for Beacon of Hope regains the maximum number of hit points possible from any healing. This means that, rules as written, this spell will also impact the additional healing that you do from your Chalice form. When you add both the higher level spell slots that we now have with that extra 1d8 of healing that we get from our Starry form, and maximize both the spell and the extra 1d8, that's just a ton of hit points that you can restore. Of course, you may find that between the temporary hit points that you're giving out each and every turn, you might not need a lot more than just the 2d6 that Aura of Vitality would give you, right, once per turn to use as a bonus action. Maybe with an occasional, Cure Wounds or Healing Word or something like that. And then instead you would, use your action a lot of the time for Toll the Dead or something. But again, I'm just going to assume here that maybe out of frustration, your DM is making every encounter 3 times deadly, right? And enemies are all just hitting like freight trains. So you are needing to squeeze every single drop of healing out of yourself as you possibly can. One nice thing about going this route, Beacon of Hope, is that it does free up our bonus action that was previously used for Aura of Vitality, right? So if you do find yourself using Beacon of Hope as concentration, feel free to throw out that spiritual weapon and get a little extra damage in as your bonus action each turn if you'd like, assuming that we're using Cure Wounds for our action, right, and not Healing Word or whatever. But because, yes, at this point, our most efficient single target heal is still Cure Wounds. So if for some crazy reason we're spending all of our spell slots, except for 1 for Beacon of Hope, on Cure Wounds, adding our Starry form, our Chalice, for bonus to each casting, plus 1d6 plus 6 temporary hit points to a party of 4 every single round, and assuming you actually needed it every single round, our total combat healing would be 992 hit points. And, divided by 13, the number of rounds you could be casting spells, your spell slot, that your spell slots would last, our average healing per round then would be 76. For the record, our hypothetical party of 4d8 characters with a 14 constitution each has 264 hit points total between them. So our total combat healing capability is now more than triple the entire hypothetical team's combined hit points. Cure Wounds, cast as just a first level spell right now, heals for 26 flat hit points with Beacon of Hope active. 26, a first level spell. And your party members are all getting 10 or so free temporary hit points every round on average if they want them. It's crazy. All right, at level 10, we are a Druid 4. We get a wild shape improvement, so now we could transform into a beast of 1/2 challenge rating or lower, and they can have a swimming speed, still not flying yet. And then, of course, we get an ability score increase or feat. My biggest fear for this character right now, frankly, is survivability and defense. With heavy armor and a shield, we're probably sitting at 20 armor class right now, and that's good. But I want to get our defense higher in case the enemy realizes that no one in our party is going to die unless we go down first. So the first thing I want to do is shore up our concentration checks and add a little more hit points. Until now, we've been sitting on a 15 constitution with no proficiency to our constitution saving throw or concentration checks. So let's take resilient constitution here, I think, to add 1 to give us a 16, so more hit points, better saving throw, and proficiency now in our constitution saving throws as well, and therefore our concentration checks. To be honest, if I were playing this character in-game, I just might take this feat as our free feat at level 1, or maybe take it at like Cleric level 4. I loved Chef so much, and I wanted to start with an 18 Wisdom, but this might be more important. At level 11, we are a Druid 5, and we get 3rd level spells. Again, there's not much here for us that we don't already have, purely from like a healing perspective, but there are, of course, plenty of great choices. Plant growth is potentially really strong for control, reducing a creature's movement to like 25% of normal. Conjure animals is, of course, depending on your DM and how they rule it. See our slide into my DM's discussion here, where we talked about how Conjure Animals works at different tables. This spell, of course, is potentially incredibly strong and arguably overpowered if you'd rather use your concentration for damage. At level 12, we are a Druid 6, and we get the Cosmic Omen feature. I just love this feature for Star Druids. So when you finish a long rest, you consult your star map for omens. You roll a die, and if you get an even number, or wheel, then when a creature within 30 feet of you makes an attack, a saving throw, or an ability check, as a reaction, you can roll a d6 and add it to the roll. And if, when consulting your star map for omens, you rolled an odd number, or woe, you can subtract a d6 from another creature's attack, ability check, or saving throw. And you can do this proficiency bonus times per day, or 4 for now, 5 shortly. It's really cool. It's like having a limited sort of on-demand, but slightly stronger Bless or Bane spell, right? Which is just really cool and fun, and will often do a great job of protecting your allies, or making sure that they succeed at whatever you're trying to do, making you feel like an awesome support character. At level 13, we are a Druid 7, and we finally get 4th level spells. Again, there are lots of great ones, none that really impact our healing game, unless you want to consider polymorphing your almost dead ally into something with a ton of hit points to be healing, I suppose, in which case that's a fantastic healing spell. Blight does some nice area of effect burst damage, potentially. Wall of Fire can be great for control and even damage. Pick your favorites and have fun with it. Okay, damage report for level 13. Our tactics haven't changed much. We're basically just casting Beacon of Hope and blowing all the rest of our spell slots on Cure Wounds to discover what our maximum total combat healing would be. We have more spell slots now, 16 total after our casting of Beacon of Hope, and our spell slots go all the way up to 7th level. So total combat healing possible for us here is 1,304 hit points. And our average healing per round would be 82. At level 14, we're a Druid 8, and we get another Wild Shape improvement. So now we can transform into a beast that has a flying speed, which is nice, and they can be of a challenge rating 1 or lower. Again, I don't anticipate that we'll actually be using this much, but in a pinch, when you need to, there you go. We get another ability score increase or feat here now, and there are a lot of good options, I think, if we wanted to continue increasing our survivability and defense, which I do. Warcaster might be nice to give us advantage on our concentration checks, among other things. Simply bumping our constitution to 18 would give us more hit points and improve our constitution and concentration saves. Tough would just flat out give us more hit points. I'd probably take one of those 3 options. I think I'd lean more towards bumping our constitution, but that's me. Even resilient dexterity might be worth considering to help sort of avoid those area of effect spells and traps and things a little better. Let me know what you guys think would be the best option here for an ability score increase or feat to help us improve our survivability. I mean, Shield Master? I don't know. Let me know what you think. At level 15, we're a Druid 9, and we finally get 5th level spells, and this is an important level for us spell-wise. So, as always, there are a lot of great options for utility, for control, but I'm going to focus on 2 that we're really going to want as a healer. So first up, greater restoration. It's a real shame it's taken us this long to get it, I think, as it can reduce exhaustion, and charmed or petrified, a curse, a reduction to an ability score, or even reduction to hit point maximum, and lots of other things besides that are usually like baked into a campaign or an adventure that only your DM would know about. Never leave home without it. We also get Mass Cure Wounds, which is a super nice group heal that's great to have when we have multiple targets that are in need of a bit of healing, right? Up to 6 creatures within 30 feet of us would regain 3d8 plus our wisdom modifier in healing. Do I use this spell, or Mass Healing Word for that matter, which we got a while back, when I'm doing like damage reports? Because technically it would be more efficient if you were hitting multiple targets with it, right, than just Cure Wounds would be. I ultimately decided not to, for 2 reasons. One, I didn't do that with the support bard when I was crunching numbers for support bard, and I want to be consistent here for comparison's sake. And 2, honestly, even though these spells would give us more total healing on a party of 4, assuming everyone in the party needed it, it's difficult to assume that everybody in the party would need it, right? We're already stretching things to assume that every party member is going to need even your temporary hit points that you're giving them every single round. Adding these group heals times 4, party members every turn, when we have the spell slot to do it, just seemed like overkill to me. Or like, okay, we're already at overkill, so whatever the next level of kill is beyond over, I don't know, ludicrous kill. It just feels like I would have been just trying to pad the numbers even more, right, than we're already padding them. So I think most rounds, it's much more likely that you're going to have like one target in greater need of healing than others, especially because of the temporary hit points that we're already giving everybody. And so an upcast Cure Wounds is still going to heal more to a single target than Mass Cure Wounds, right? Or especially Mass Healing Word. So I'm going to stick with Cure Wounds for number crunching, realizing that it might feel fairly subjective and a little arbitrary. At level 16, we are a Druid 10, and we get a feature called Twinkling Constellations. This subclass just has the best feature names, right? Okay, so this is probably the main reason why I wanted to stay Druid instead of go back to Cleric all those levels ago. First up, when we're in Chalice form, we heal for 2d8 plus our Wisdom modifier now instead of 1d8. Archer form also gets an extra d8 of damage now, so 2d8 of damage. Dragons get to fly now, but we can already fly, so not as cool. But anyway, better yet, at the start of each of our turns while in Starry form, you can change which constellation you're using. That is fantastic for versatility, I think. I'm guessing, there are going to be turns, I have to believe, where you're going to look around the battlefield and realize that everyone's pretty much topped off on healing. Wouldn't it be cool to switch just for a turn to like the Archer constellation, right? For one round, throw out a guiding bolt as your action. And by the way, you have a number of those that you can use for free without spending a spell slot, right? And then as a bonus action, hit him with an Archer attack that you have advantage on now, thanks to your guiding bolt, for another 2d8 plus your Wisdom modifier. It's not like you're going to be doing crazy DPR or anything, but I just really appreciate the versatility, right? And I have to imagine that anyone playing this would. Even people who love healing are going to get bored of it once in a while, right? And finally, at level 17, we're a Druid 11, and we get 6th level spells. So there are a lot of cool, fun, powerful options here, like Druid Grove or Transport via Plants. But we just want to make sure that we pick up Heal, at least, which is one of the most efficient healing spells in the game. It feels less efficient when we're using Beacon of Hope. Unlike most healing spells, you don't roll for healing with Heal. It just straight up heals for 70 hit points, and it also cures deaf, blind, and diseases. If you add our Star Chalice bonus of 2d8, plus 5, that would be 91 hit points if they had Beacon of Hope. But again, most of that doesn't benefit from Beacon of Hope, right? Only the Star form bit does at this point. So you kind of ask yourself, well, if I could be using Aura of Vitality and get that extra 2d6 every round of healing. Well, the Cure Wounds wouldn't be as good without Beacon of Hope, but I get that extra 2d6. It's a little more efficient if I'm low on spell slots, or I don't want to burn, a bunch of spell slots every single turn. Maybe Aura Vitality is a little better if I have heal in my pocket for those big heals when I need it. Something that you'll have to think about. Just for pure numbers, Beacon of Hope still looks a little bit better, but again, it burns through your resources more quickly. You're going to have to decide how you want to play this here. But for our final damage report, assuming that we're casting Cure Wounds with every single spell slot of 5th level and below, except for 1 for Beacon of Hope, and using Heal for our 6th, 7th, 8th, and even 9th level spell slots, because yes, we do have 9th level spell slots now, each of them healing for max hit points, adding a 2d8 plus 5 to each of them, maxed as well, thanks to Beacon of Hope, so 21 total hit points every single time we cast a healing spell, just from the Star Chalice. And as always, giving every character in your party, in your 4-player party, 1d6 plus 6 temporary hit points over 18 rounds, as we currently have 19 spell slots, and again, we're using 1 for Beacon of Hope. Our total combat healing would be 1776. We just celebrated Independence Day here in the US. That's very appropriate. So 1776 total combat healing, and an average hit points per round, HPR, of 99. It would have been awesome to break that centennial barrier. We got so close. For what it's worth, our hypothetical party of D8 players with 14 constitution each has 488 total hit points at this level. Maybe they would have taken some things to buff their hit points by now, and we would have been closer to, 550 or something, but still more than triple that with the total healing that we can do in combat. All right, final thoughts. You know what? I actually had a lot more fun creating this character than I thought I would, I'll admit. I don't tend to play support characters, or especially healers, particularly often in any role-playing game, but at the end of the day, I love the fact that a playstyle that a lot of people enjoy, being a healer, that was previously sort of unattainable almost, I think, in D&D, now feels like a potential possibility, And who am I to tell somebody that their playstyle, that the thing that they like to do in game is not valid, or, not the right way to do it, or that it's not supposed to, that D&D isn't supposed to be played that way. If someone wants to do it and that's fun for them, hey, you know what? This is great. Now they have a way to potentially do that. And I don't see that as a bad thing. Also, I am more curious to see this build in action than I think any other build I've ever done. I mean, the reality is, of course, monsters and enemies can still outpace the healing that you do, depending on how your DM decides to play it. But I assume that they're going to be buffing, all the combat encounters to more regularly put your party at risk. And so I really want to know, how efficient and effective this would be if you have one character who's just healing all the time. The numbers that I've reported on are going to be a lot smaller if, for example, damage is not spread out amongst the entire party, and everyone isn't taking a little bit of damage every turn, but instead people are getting focused fired. And yes, of course, player death is still very possible. If all that you are doing is healing in game, not only will it slow combat down, but you're not going to be helping to eliminate the enemy, meaning that you and your entire party might run out of resources more regularly. You don't win the battle of action economy by not taking out the bad guys. But all of those caveats aside, I think this build could be a lot of fun to play. It could really, like I say, force your DM to kind of bring the pain every single time with some buffed out encounters and monsters, and you could really see some massive swings and spikes in damage and healing, right? Massive damage spikes on a monster's turn, massive healing going the other way that could make it feel oh my gosh, oh okay, oh my gosh, oh okay, we're okay. It could really keep everyone on their toes, and could frankly make you the star of the show. pun intended, and really let you scratch that itch that you might have of being a full-time healer in D&D. Of course, it could be incredibly dangerous. It would put you potentially in a situation where, as all good PvPers know, right, the number one objective is always kill the healer. And if your DM feels the same, and his monsters feel the same, and you go down because you're always getting focused fired, and you go down against a super difficult encounter, it could mean a TPK for your entire party for sure. But hey, you guys know me. I love the high risk, high reward playstyle. And if playing this character leads to that, then I think it's a character concept that I could really get behind. So anyway, that's the show for the week. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. You are super fantastic. Please check out the other content that we have on the channel. See if there's something that you might enjoy other than these character builds that I do. But regardless, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon.